I'm going to cover some pre-flop concepts. Particularly, I'm going to go over position really quickly, and then I'm going to talk about raising a little bit. And then what I'm going to talk about tomorrow is going to be some post-flop decisions, particularly that have to do with, how do you play these boards that have a lot of texture on them? And by texture, what I mean is cards that are highly related to each other, right? So there's a big difference between a board that's like ace-9-3 with no suits versus a board that's like jack-10-6 with 2 spades, right? Because those cards really relate to each other. I'm going to talk about that situation. I bet those are situations that a lot of you have a lot of difficulty with. They're very complex situations to deal with. So we're going to talk about pre-flop today and then post-flop tomorrow. So before I ever talk any poker at all to anybody, I always like to define the problem, because I think that one of the things that you'll see in the book, if you get it, is that people don't really think about what their purpose is at the table enough. So people come in, they're like, oh, I want to win money or something like that. But in order to set your purpose properly, you have to understand what the problem that the game of poker presents is. And it's this problem at the top. It's a game of decision making under conditions of uncertainty. What that means is that you have multiple decision points in a hand, right? It's not like craps, right? In craps you have one decision, like pass or don't pass, or I guess you could play the hops, but I wouldn't recommend it. But anyway, and that's it, right? And then a bunch of stuff happens and you're done. So it's just one decision at the beginning of the roll. Here you have multiple decisions that you can make. Like in a game of poker in Nevada where there's four raises and a bet, there's a possible 5 decision points on each round of betting, and there's 4 possible rounds of betting, so there's 20 places where you might have to make a decision during a hand. That's the highest number that you'd have to make. And you have to make that under conditions of uncertainty, meaning that you can't see your opponent's hole cards, right? So in a game of chess, I can see my opponent's hole position. So the game of chess is about iteration, right? It's about how many levels deep can I get into the thinking process here? Like, how I'm going to think of all your possible responses, and then I'm going to figure out all my possible responses to that, and then maybe I'll figure out all your possible responses to my possible responses, and so on and so forth. And really what makes somebody a better chess player is how far into that process can they go. And so because there's no hidden information, chess is actually a solvable game. When we have enough computing power, that game will be solved, and a human being will never beat a computer. And we know that because computers have already solved checkers, which is a more simplified version of chess. But poker isn't that way. I can't see your hole cards. Okay? So when I'm defining what you have, I'm doing this under conditions of uncertainty that isn't the same in a game like chess. And in fact, if you were to talk to a game theorist, they would tell you that chess wasn't a game. It's actually a calculation. It's a mathematical exercise, whereas poker is a game because games require that there's hidden information and interaction among players over time. Okay? So once we understand what the problem is, then we can come up with our real purpose at the table. And it's not to win money, it's to reduce uncertainty. Because if you reduce uncertainty, if you put yourself in a position where things are more clear to you than your opponents, then you can force your opponents to make bad decisions, and you'll be making good decisions, and guess what? You're going to win. And it turns out that in poker, the score is money. Right? So you're just going for a good score. But the way you get to a good score is this, because frankly, I could be playing for matchsticks or pride or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. Like, if I'm playing with my family, I might be playing for pride, right? No money involved. If I'm playing in prison, maybe I'm playing for, credits, I don't know, cigarettes or something. Hopefully I'm not in prison. Okay, so already went through this, right? So what we're going to go through today in thinking about this is position as it relates to that problem, and then raising it as it relates to this problem that we've defined. And then this is the same thing. When we talk about playing monsters on these flops that are textured, it's a decision problem about uncertainty. So everything's going to be framed in that language. On the slide, I've notated, or Andrew has, he was nice to do this, the page that the discussion is on in the book so that you have some easy reference. Okay, so here's the deal. We know that in this game, because of the problem, information is going to be power, right? The more information we have, the better decision maker we're going to be. Well, it turns out that position equals information, right? Because when you're under the gun, everybody knows what under the gun means? Awesome. Okay, my book has a great glossary, though, in case you don't know. When you're under the gun, when you're in first position at the poker table, you are going to be acting with the least amount of information before the flop, right? So you have to make a decision before anybody else has done anything. That's no small problem, I want to add, Okay? When you're on the button, you're in the opposite situation, right? When you're on the button, you're going to act with the most information. You're going to see what everybody does before you ever have to make a decision. Now, Hold'em is a game where position is constant, right, throughout the hand. It doesn't change. So you know that when you choose to enter a pot in first position, you're not just choosing to make a decision that's going to be hard right then, but you're choosing to make a decision that's going to be hard for the rest of the hand. Because anytime anybody calls, one of those people who's sitting to your left calls, you're going to have to act before them for the rest of the hand. So this is a problem you're choosing to carry out through the rest of the hand. When you're on the button, you're in the opposite situation. You know that for the rest of the hand, you're always going to get to see what everybody does before you ever have to make a decision. That's a pretty huge difference. To give you an idea of how huge a difference it is, I like to refer to my small children. And have you ever seen these kids do this? Like you have two little girls, and one of them says, do you like Justin Bieber? And the other one always says the same thing, I don't know, do you? They don't ever answer, right? They'll say, I don't know, do you? And then the first one says, I asked you first. So they're having a positional battle, right? Like you got to think about that. They're having a battle over position. Who has to give the first answer here, right? And the reason why is that they understand that it's kind of a disaster to go first. Because now we're talking about social currency, right? If they like Justin Bieber and the other one doesn't, and if they don't like Justin Bieber and the other one does, right? So they got to figure out what the right answer is, because randomly they're only going to get the right answer half the time, and they're trying to up the probability that they're correct. So they want to get the other person to answer first. Poker players are surprisingly less smart than 7-year-olds. Right? Because, here's the thing. How many of you had heard this? Oh, under the gun is the new button. No, it's not. On the button, I get to act last. How is that the new button? What are you talking about? Okay, so when people frame this positional problem, okay, we're not going to go there. When people frame this positional problem, they're always saying, oh, they put up these hand charts, these silly hand charts. I don't even know what those are for, because I have no idea what game you're playing in. Because honestly, the hand chart will be different if you're in a 1 and 2 game with a bunch of drunk people, versus, in the final day of the World Series of Poker. I can guarantee you I'd have to give you a different chart for that. So I don't understand hand charts, but anyway, when you've seen those in books, because every book that you've ever read has a hand chart, right? Except mine, by the way, mine doesn't. But, because they don't make sense to me. So, but when you see those hand charts, they're always talking about, oh, you should play these hands in early position because there's X probability that there's a better hand behind you. Okay, seriously, how many of you guys play hands where you know for a fact the other person has a better hand? Do any of you do that? I guarantee you all do. I'm going to prove it to you right now. You have 9-7 of hearts, and the board comes king of hearts, 3 of hearts, 10 of spades. How many of you are calling on the flop? All of you, right? Do you have the best hand right now? Okay? And you don't care, right? Okay, so we don't care about whether we have the best hand. That's actually a decision that comes up very rarely in poker, believe it or not. In a game of Hold'em, now, in a game of kitchen sink or something, it comes up a lot. Kitchen sink, you have 5 cards, 5 on the board, anyway, then it really matters if you have the best hand. But in a game like Hold'em, it's rarely part of your decision about whether you have the best hand. So this isn't an issue about whether you have the best hand. So the charts are really leading you astray here. The issue is, if somebody comes in behind me, what is my decision going to look like? Because if I'm in position on them, I can win without the best hand. Because I'm going to know what they're going to do, and I'm going to see that they're weak and all of that stuff. But if I come in first position, I'm not going to know any of that. So I'm going to have very little information. So what causes you to play tighter in first position is that if you come in first position, you have to have a hand that knows about itself. Because the other players are not going to tell you anything about your hand. So do you see, it's a different way of thinking about it. So what I mean by that is that if I have a hand like King Jack, it's very important for you guys to tell me something about your hand, right? Because King Jack is a very kind of marginal holding. I don't know if it's good or not, so I'd like to see whether you're weak and all that stuff before me. But if I have aces, do I have to know anything about your hand? I just know I have the best hand. So there are hands that contain clarity in and of themselves. And those are the hands you play in first position usually. Hands like ace-king, ace-queen. Hands like 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks, queens, kings, aces. I'm done, by the way. Okay, so, and the reason why you don't play hands like ace-jack is this clarity issue. I don't really know I don't know much about ace-jack. I'm not sure if it's good, and here's the problem. If I improve and I flop a jack, now I really don't know what I have. The board comes king, jack, 3. I've got 3 people behind me. How am I feeling? So don't play hands where when you improve, the problem gets worse. right? Play hands where when you improve, the problem gets better. If I have 2 sevens and I improve, what do I have? Awesome. Do I know what I have? My hand knows what it is now, right? So I can be in first position with that hand. I don't care what anybody does behind me. I have the best hand. Great. Now, there's another problem being in first position. Is it easy to bluff from first position? No. Okay, that's bad, right? So is it easy to bluff from the button? Okay, so that's a good reason. You can play hands that are more likely going to end up as bluffs on the button then. You know what hands more likely end up as bluffs? Bad ones. No, this is important. The worse the hand you play, the more likely you're going to have to bluff, right? People don't connect that up in starting cards. It's very connected in my book, but this is something we think about with starting hands. How's my bluffing frequency going to look for the rest of the hand? If I choose to play a crappy hand, my bluffing frequency is going to be higher than if I choose to play a better hand. So if I'm going to play a crappy hand, I should be in a spot where bluffing is going to work, and that's not first position. Now, but you might be saying to yourself, oh, I'm not worried about that, though. I want to get the guy when I flop a good hand. How easy it is if you have a set to get money out of your opponent when you have to go first. It's not very easy, right? So it's a twofold problem. You get both sides of the sword there, right? I can't bluff, and if I do make a hand, I can't get any money out of you. So I would suggest not playing a lot of hands from first position unless you know exactly what they are. Because I wouldn't play these speculative hands from there, because if you speculate and you hit, it's not like you can cash them anyway. And if you speculate and don't hit, you can't win the pot. Okay? So stop doing that. All right, so listen, we've decided what kind of hands we're going to play from first position, right? And they're really good ones. Now, obviously, if you're in a game where bluffing is very effective, you can loosen up a little bit from first position. If you're in a game where bluffing isn't working for you very well, you'd probably tighten up from all positions at the table. So that's just you to decide what kind of game you're in. So I'm not going to tell you, oh, never play ace-jack in first position, because you've got to decide whether you've got a tight game on your hands. Tighter the game, the more hands you can play. The looser the game, the fewer you can play, for this reason. All right. So we've now decided, okay, I'm going to come into the pot, and we have a choice about whether we're going to raise or we're going to call. Now, I am not going to tell you, like many books do, that in the game of No Limit Hold'em, when you're going in and playing a tournament, if you're first into the pot, you should raise. I think that's absurd, right? Because I don't know what game you're in. It will work about 80% of the time, you know, which works only 80% of the time. That's the problem. So it would be like if I told you I before E, and then you came to me and you said, I just got a, F on my spelling test because I couldn't spell neighbor. And I went, oh, yeah, because I didn't tell you the except after C part and except when it's A, like in neighbor and way, and then there's weird, right? Because I only told you the rule that worked most of the time, I before E. But now you're screwed. Yeah, but the problem is that most people, when they give you a rule, as opposed to teaching you how to think for yourself, they're giving you a rule that's going to work 80% of the time, because that author is telling you something that has worked for them generally. You know what? You're not me. People don't react to you the same way that they react to me. So I would be doing you a huge disservice if I gave you rules. I don't use rules myself anyway. So instead, I'm going to give you ways to think. So what we're going to do is figure out, well, what's the value of raising? Because if we understand the value of raising, we should be able to understand where it's appropriate to raise and where it's not appropriate to raise, right? So value 1 of raising is to gain information. Now, that shouldn't surprise you. What's the problem in poker? Lack of information. So one would hope that the most important thing that raising did for you was to get you information. So